Good afternoon. Our final session is on the management and upgrade of Hellenic cultural heritage. I wanted to, we are running a little bit behind schedule, but I wanted to mention for those of you who were not with us yesterday that there is the contribution from the Minister of Tourism of Greece was yesterday, so this is not included at this point. We are since yesterday, a number of the distinguished speakers have highlighted both the value and the impact that tourism can have as a sector in both the immediate term for Greece to come out of the crisis, but also as a pillar for sustainable growth in the long term. In this framework for Greece, cultural tourism is an incredibly important, has a very important position, and that framework has been identified by the Foundation as an area where a pilot initiative can have impact in creating opportunities and long-lasting impact. We are delighted to have with us today both Dr. Lina Mendoni, the Secretary General of the Hellenic Ministry of Culture and Sports, and Dr. Evangelos Kyriakidis, Senior Lecturer at the University of Kent and the Director of Heritage Conservancy, Initiative of Heritage Conservancy in Greece. The initiative, the pilot project on the upgrade and management of Hellenic cultural heritage will be implemented by the two institutions. So I'm very happy to welcome you with us, as well as the four expert panelists who will give us perspectives both from Greece, but also from the international field, responding to the presentation. So without delay, I'd like to welcome Dr. Mendoni.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. President of the Foundation, first of all, I would like to thank, on behalf of my colleagues, Evangelos, Nicoleta, and Anna, and me personally, the Stavros Niarchos Foundation for this invitation and for its collaboration in several projects with the Ministry. Of course, the major one, by far, is the Cultural Center Stavros Niarchos in the Falliron Delta for the National Opera and National Library. The protection, conservation, and promotion of the cultural heritage is the primary concern of the Hellenic Ministry of Culture and Sports, which manages 169 organized archaeological sites, 2,006 public museums, more than 21 listed monuments, and more than 60 million movable objects. Over the past 20 years, with the support of the European Union funding, efforts have assumed an extensive and systematic character. More specifically, from 1994 onward, 1,319 projects were carried out with a total budget of 2.3 billion euros, while 480 projects are underway in the current programming period with a total budget of around 640 million euros. Today, about 4,000 people, not permanent staff, are getting involved to these projects for a period between 7 to 48 months. The most of them are between 25 and 40 years. In Athens, the project for the unification of archaeological sites was carried out during the preparation period leading up to the 2004 Olympic Games. It offered the city an extraordinary stroll, linking the important archaeological sites in the historic center of the city, extending from the Panathinaik Stadium, Kalimarmaro, and the Temple of Olympian Zeus to the Keramikos. The unification project succeeded in familiarizing visitors to Athens with its important cultural content. Even more, it transformed the image of the city in the immediate environments of monuments and sites where typical traditional neighborhoods of the capital have been preserved. The extensive work of protection, configuration, and enhancement at the archaeological sites has transformed visits to this into a unique experience of communication with the ancient Greek world and its culture. By turning busy thoroughfares such as Areopagitou, Apostolou Pavlou, and Ermou streets into pedestrian walkways and reconfiguring them, the urban landscape has been converted to the place for rest and recreation. Comparable projects, both at archaeological sites as well as museums on the same or smaller scale, can be realized throughout Greece. Nonetheless, despite the extent of interventions, it appears that many sites and museums are not yet established as popular visitor destinations. Available evidence shows that the traditional model of a visit to the Acropolis and the new Acropolis Museum for Athens and to Cape Sunio for Attica still account for the overwhelming majority of interested, both for local communities and for visitors. Familiarizing the public with cultural goods and promoting archaeological sites as landmarks, places for our own citizens and visitors to Greece to meet one another and engage in creative activities, are a key concern and priority for the Ministry of Culture. Culture is a pillar of sustainable development, and the effective management of Greek cultural capital can transform archaeological sites and museums into an agent of growth and create new job opportunities. There are valid reasons for claiming that cultural heritage is directly connected with the creation of the appropriate conditions for the growth of cultural tourism. In an experience economy, cultural tourism provides the particular experiences and qualities to enhance and differentiate the tourism product. In seeking out the best possible solution and practices, the necessity that establish a pilot program was recognized. Such a program will build on the international experience in issues related to the management of the cultural heritage and also indicate the right means of cooperating and establishing partnerships with the civil society and the private sector. In this direction, we will explore new means and tools to be included in the new model for the management of sites and museums in order to upgrade available services so that visits to sites and museums will become an integrated experience. We will also pursue the greater adoption of sites by the local communities, as well as ways to further build on this increased interest. We shall also have to deal with the possible risks that will come as a result of the subsequent rise of the load that sites will have to cope with. The emphasized improvement in the quality of services offered at sites and museums, as determined by the pilot program, is expected to contribute to the optimization of the Greek tourist product and consequently to the upgrade and growth of the greater areas surrounding these particular sites and museums, thus providing more job opportunities to young people with various specializations and levels of training, either as a direct consequence of the program itself or indirectly through job creation in business that would also benefit. The legal framework for the program's pursuits is defined by the Greek Constitution and law on the protection of antiquities and cultural heritage, which besides protection also require the sustainable management of cultural heritage. The program will initially be implemented at two sites, the ancient Keramikos site in Athens and the sanctuary of Artemis at Vravron in the rural area of Attica. The results from the program's implementation at these sites will serve as a guide for future expansion in more sites and monuments to the entire country. The criteria for the selection of sites included in the program were geographic location, quality features of the site and local museums, the historical periods, themes and concepts with which the sites are associated, as well as their placement within existing routes and itineraries for visits in the region. Sites with museums were selected at which, first, enhancement programs has been carried out recently, 2000-2004 at the site and Museum of Keramikos, 2002-2007 at the museum in Vravron and currently on the site, and which largely comply with modern perceptions and visitors' requirements. Second, the surviving remains of structures compose monumental complexes preserved to such a degree that their form and function were comprehensible to visitors. These sites are particularly suitable for the presentation and interpretation of the political, religious, economic, and social life of ancient Athens, Keramikos, and the peripheral themes of ancient Attica, Vravron. The interventions described below related to both sites and define the new approach that this pilot program will initiate with regard to the everyday management of the sites, as well as to the presentation and promotion of the various activities taking place there. In each case, both large and small-scale interventions are being planned. The archaeological site of Keramikos and its site museum feature the most important ancient cemetery of Athens, as well as the Dipylon and Sacred Gate complex of the fortifications of the city, which was the starting point of the two official religious processions of Athens, the Panathenaea and the Eleusinian Mysteries, respectively. It was also a busy workshop area for the production of pottery, and occupied a riverside location on the banks of the Eridanos, one of Athens' three rivers. The site lies at the western end of the unification of the archaeological site of Athens, and yet remains undiscovered by the majority of visitors to the city. The main intervention planned for the Keramikos aims at the reorganization of the entrance and exit to the archaeological site and the creation of multi-purpose venue. The existing entrance of the Ermou pedestrian zone will be preserved. The exit, however, will be moved to the opposite side on Asomaton Street, facing the Benaki Museum of Islamic Art and in close proximity to the Judith Synagogue, an important listed monument of Athens. The proposed change will transform the visitor flow in the site and will provide, first, relief from the large concentration of visitors in particular place during the summer months. Second, unhindered access for the disabled via a slightly sloping route. And third, better touring of visitors through the entire site and not just the area surrounding the main path. At the new exit, the pre-existing buildings used today as storerooms and the surrounding area will be transformed into a multi-purpose venue comprising, first, a museum shop with casts, books, and souvenirs about the Keramikos. Second, a small library and an info kiosk with virtual touring of the site and multilingual multimedia installations about various themes and narratives connecting it with the social and political history of Athens, and especially Athenian hegemony and the Pericles funeral oration. Third, an indoor-outdoor cafe. Minor interventions are also planned for the site museum with regard to information display. The conservation laboratories will be renovated and upgraded as well and will become accessible to visitors for educational purposes. The site at Vravron boasts one of the most famous sanctuaries of the goddess Artemis, protector of infants and pre-adolescent girls, as well as of nature, wildlife, and hunting. It therefore offers great potential for various thematic narratives and stories associated with famous Greek myths, such as that of Iphigenia, the daughter of Agamemnon, the Greek leader in the Trojan War. Today, the site and the museum lie within a protected natural reserve, a wetland and bird sanctuary on the banks of the ancient Erassinos River, which flows into the Bay of Vravron on the east coast of Attica. Located in the rural outskirts of Attica, near the airport, the site presents great opportunity for the combined experience and appreciation of the natural and cultural landscapes that will create a new pole of tourism attraction to this little-known part of the greater Athens area. At Vravron, the project will highlight the relationship between the sanctuary site and the intact natural environment and will also encourage visits to the little-known prehistoric Acropolis. The site museum will be upgraded with multimedia installation related to the history of the site, the introduction of the cult of Artemis in Attica, and the role of the sanctuary, especially in the connection with the preparation of children's integration in Athenian society. Other existing structures will be renovated and transformed into multi-purpose service area for site visitors. More particularly, first, a stone building currently serving as an auxiliary and storage room will be turned on and inside information and library space for visitors. Second, a pre-existing building already being converted to a gift shop and cafe will be extended to include an outdoor area. Third, significant landscaping and drainage works will take place in the whole area surrounding the sanctuary. Gardens, irrigated by local springs, will feature the aromatic herbs and flowers of the region and will also highlight local agricultural products. The Ministry of Culture is an ex officio manager of heritage sites and museums in Greece. Cultural heritage is defined as a public good by the Greek constitution and is thus placed under the strict control and supervision of the state through the Ministry of Culture and Sports. Nevertheless, cooperation with non-governmental agencies and partnerships with the private sector are not only acceptable, but also increasingly pursued and encouraged. In this particular case, the Ministry has joined forces and formed a partnership with a very well-known Stavros Niarchos Foundation, a leading international foundation with a special interest in the cultural domain and Greece, with the added participation of the Initiative for Heritage Conservancy, an international NGO. Evangelos is the director of this NGO, aimed to promote good practices in heritage management through education and research. The IAC initiative specializes on educational programs, digitization of sites for management purpose, public engagement, conservation, and legal protection of monuments. It is also a partner in a leading MA in heritage management that combines the wealth of archaeology and business. The sustainable management, promotion, and use of the sites require strong administrative and organizational foundation. First of all, however, a thorough knowledge of the sites themselves, their particular characteristics, needs, and potential is necessary. The current condition, as well as existing assets, problems, and priorities, must be identified, and the emphasized goals and interests of all stakeholders must be taken into consideration along with the long-term gains and risks involved. All intervention must have been to account both with the expectation of the various categories of tourists and foreign visitors and the members of the local community. As a second necessary step, we will be to use the information gathered in order to devise and integrate all-including effective and viable management plan for the sites that will ensure their protection and use in a scientifically, economically, and environmentally sustainable way. The legal framework and any needs for amendments and additions must also be considered at the time of planning. A third step will be to develop a strategy for the targeted marketing and promotion of the sites to specific visitors groups in appropriate the efficient ways, which will also include admission pricing policies, income sources, and all possible synergies with local business. The promotion of the site must be pursued at several levels, but needs to start primarily from the availability of a rich and multi-faced content embellished with attractive narratives that will provide the conceptual setting as well as the necessary connection with geographically adjacent or thematically similar and relevant sites of interest. The use of up-to-date ICT technologies will be one of particular importance in this respect, and adequate information must become available through the internet to prospective visitors and the educational community. All content must be well adapted and targeted in order to appeal to audiences of different ethnic, social, educational, and cultural origin. A major goal is, of course, to address and attract first and foremost the local community and the inhabitants of neighboring Athens. Recurrent events such as exhibitions, festivals, and combined cultural and environment-related activities can be particularly effective in this respect, especially if accompanied by high-level amenities and services on site. Commercial activities can significantly contribute to the financial sustainability of the sites and activities, but need to be well organized and balanced, and most importantly, must be in accordance with the properties and tolerances of each site. The promotion of the sites and related activities to goal audiences of as tourist destination will, of course, also have to be pursued through the traditional channels of the National Hellenic Tourist Organization and the Ministry of Tourism, and in collaboration with the Association of Greek Tourism Enterprises. The sustainability of the projects is further directly connected to the ensured availability of well-trained staff, both scientific and technical, archaeologists, historians, conservators, as well as the permanent participation and synergy of national and international heritage management partners, local volunteers, non-governmental associations and organizations, and partners from the private sector. Training must be an ongoing and as much as possible on-site activity so as to create personal face-to-face relationships and cooperation and encourage the development of strong bonds with the particular sites. Participation will involvement needs to go hand in hand with the creation of a flexible and effective feedback mechanism so that knowledge, experience, ideas, and proposals can be shared, evaluated, communicated, implemented in the years to come. This mechanism should permit all aspects of the site management and activities and involve all stakeholders. A follow-up period of 3 years is currently emphasized to see how the project develops and how it can be further improved. With these pilot projects, we aspire to create a new model for the enhancement and upgrade of the long-term conservation and management of archaeological sites in Greece and their transformation into meaningful and attractive visitor destinations. Archaeological sites should become poles of culture and education as well as sources of sustainable social and economic development. As such, they can have an enormous impact that can also be measured in economic terms. Career opportunities for new researchers, education, and jobs for local young people, growth for local business and the tourist sector are only a few examples. Equally importantly, these projects are expected to have long-term favorable effects for the sites and monuments themselves in terms of viable conservation and management. Ladies and gentlemen, this first draft, I could say, of that pilot project for the management and upgrade of Hellenic cultural heritage is a product of close collaboration for Evangelos, Nicoleta, and Anna. Evangelos, as the director of the NGO, is on the panel, and he also will give answers to your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mendoni. And as a first response, I'd like to invite Mr. Gidi Grinstein, president of the Red Institute, based in Tel Aviv, to give us some perspective in his response.
Thank you. Let me see that works. Works? Doesn't? Yes, it does. Okay. So first of all, thank you very much for the honor of being invited all the way from Israel. I just an hour ago found the Australian colleague. You remember first day it was mentioned, the 2 people traveled, one from Australia, one from Israel. I'm the Israeli guy. And about 10 years ago, I founded and I ran a group called Re'ut, which in Hebrew means the ability to see clearly, having gone to the Kennedy School of Government here with Petros, a classmate of mine. And the reason I founded this organization is that prior to that, I served in the Bureau of the Prime Minister of Israel, really at the center of power, of politics and government. And I saw the weakness of government when it came to dealing with very complex challenges facing society. And I understood that the weakness of government was structural and institutional. It had little to do with who's in power. Not only that, it's not an Israeli problem, it's a global problem among all developed countries. And therefore, some of the remedy to the problems of society will have to come from the outside. And that insight led me to establish Re'ut. And I believe I'm here today because of the last 10 years, we've been focusing on basically on the social and economic vision of the Israeli society. And from that perspective, I'd like to share with you a few insights. So we asked ourselves 7 years ago, where should Israel be? What is the vision? And the answer was, and I apologize for not being able to get into the details, the answer was that Israel can and should be one of the 15 leading countries in the world in terms of quality of life within 15 years. So that was 2015. 2008, and we were shooting for 2023, a decade, 9 years from now. Now, why is this essential for us? For a reason that was mentioned earlier here. In Israel, we have very talented labor and relatively low quality of life compared to other developed countries. And because we have high quality labor and low quality of life, out-migration. We're the #1 exporter of talent in the world on a per capita basis, by far more than any other country. And those of you that are here in American universities, you see it in the student body and in faculty. Very serious problem. And when there's an outgrowing of talent beyond a certain level, it's a very serious problem. So we said we need to leap Israel, and we have done, that's what we've been doing over the last 7 years. And what is really interesting is that only 13 countries over the last 65 years have been able to leap. It's extremely difficult to transform the social and economic condition of a country. And it's an art to do it. And that is the art that I'd like to focus on today, using the examples that were mentioned here as one sector within a much bigger picture. So 3 of the key projects that we have been involved in and are relevant to my presentation. First, we're looking at how to transform a region, a section of the country. In parallel, we're looking on how to transform a city. In this case, the city of Tzfat. It's an ancient city in northern Israel, 24 centuries old, that is unique because it's the beginning of Jewish spirituality. Jewish spirituality began in that city of Tzfat, on the top of the mountain, very high. Today, it's a very poor city and a major tourist attraction. So very interesting combination where you have millions of people coming in from one side, living on the other side. You turn around a little bit like Atlantic City. Poverty over here, deep poverty, one of the poorest communities in Israel. So that's where we've been working, and I believe that based on that experience, I was invited to speak here. Thank you for this invitation. So first of all, so I read this. I read the presentation, the excerpt that we received, and I want to respond in a very sort of Jewish way. And the response in the Jewish way is by asking further questions. And because we don't have a lot of time, and I don't know if I'll get to the end of my presentation, these are the questions I'd like to ask. You all see them. I don't want to read them one by one. But what I can tell you is that based on our experience working in Israel, when you're invested in an infrastructure project that is supposed to be transformational, these questions and other questions are questions you need to be able to ask. What is the vision? What is the strategy? How are best practices going to be extracted? What's the scalability mechanism? And on and on. Each and every one of these questions is a heavy question. So now what I'd like to do is basically to zoom out and then within 8 minutes come back to these questions. So first of all, I want to say something about the Israeli context. We've been speaking about youth unemployment. But basically, youth unemployment, severe crisis in Greece. I have to say, I follow these issues. I'm really interested. I was not aware how deep the crisis is. This is really exceptional challenge that is facing the Greek society. I want to say a few words about the Israeli history. 1951 to 1972, 21 years, 22 years, average per capita growth, 5.5%. Average per capita growth, 5.5%, while the population grew 5-fold. So the population multiplies 5 times, from 600,000 to 3 million, and per capita income grows 5.5%. Unmatched economic achievement. 1972, crisis. And then comes the war, 1973, and the energy crisis. From 1974, it is clear that we need to do very serious reforms. Only in 1985, 11 years later, we call this the lost decade, the reforms are happening. We moved from no inflation to hyperinflation, 400%. We moved from huge surplus in currency to zero foreign currency reserves. Banking system collapsed and nationalized, and I could go on and on. So only when we were literally almost hitting the bottom of of the bottom, the political will was found to reform. So 10 years, okay? Then come the first wave of reform. A whole decade of deep reform of every section of the economy and the society until the mid-1990s, and now we're into the second decade of reform. My bottom line, my message is, you're probably looking at 30 years of work here. And that's very important because this is a horizon. Bill Gates said, people overestimate what can be done in a year, but underestimate what can be done in a decade. This is 30 years here looking ahead. But I want to tell you of some of what happened in Israel. This, you know, American discourse, 1%. Top line, the amount of capital in society owned by the top 1% of the population. Israel is no different. Bottom is 80% of the population reflects on the bottom line. Israel is just the same. We moved from being the most egalitarian society to the least, one of the three most polarized societies among developed countries. Poverty, that we didn't know and we didn't have. Over here, what you can see, okay, this is Sao Paulo, Brazil. This is Israel, the wealthiest neighborhood in Israel, the poorest neighborhood in Israel, separated by a wall. We didn't have these gaps 25 years ago. Okay? Social protest. You have photos from 4 continents. Israel here included. Over here, this is Israel. One of them is Egypt, one of them is Chile, one of them is Europe. And then your Greece over here. Okay, so what is the vision? And my argument is, when you're talking about a sector that is so central to the economy and to the society, like culture and tourism, there has to be a discussion of the vision of the country. That is a conversation that has to take place in context. So 2029, 15 years down the road, is random. Could have been 2024, could have been 2034, as long as it's deep into the future and we can begin to actually discuss directions. And what I can tell you is, based on our experience in Israel, the old distinction between socialism and capitalism no longer works. Okay, so I'm on the 3-minute line, and I want to say that there are key things that are essential in the public sphere for us to be able to move forward. There has to be vision. There has to be a mobilization of the serving elite. It's not the political elite. It's the people out there in society that are mobilized to implement the vision, values, certain institutions. We don't have the time to get into that. And very, very important, development policy. Unique global and regional development policy. So these are interventions of the government that are designed with tools of government that leverage the unique assets that you have as a country based on regional approach. Every region has a slightly different approach, and jiving with the global trend, which is key. If you're not connected to a global trend, let me skip that slide. If you're not connected to a global trend, very, very difficult to grow. Now, it's a shared effort of society. What you see here are events that we did in Israel. Hundreds of people from all over society participate in discussing the vision and the strategy of the country. And from now, I want to basically focus on the project that we're here to discuss. And I want to basically say that this is a partnership between the government and a philanthropy. But when we're talking about transforming a country, these are two very different roles. So I want to focus on the role of philanthropy because I believe the role of government may be clearer. First of all, there has to be understanding of the global trend. In this case, you see Madonna, and she's wearing a shirt called Kabbalists Do It Better. The Kabbalah is the Jewish spirituality that began in Tzfat. So when Madonna sings in a concert with the word Kabbalah on her shirt, it means it's a global trend, and we have a big opportunity. Second approach is cluster. For a city or for a sector to be transformed, there has to be a cluster of institutions and activities. Some of them are business, that has been discussed, but many of the elements of the cluster are non-business. They are not-for-profit, academic institutions, research, and on and on. I could relate to that. Third element that is essential, a network of small units, far more resilient than a few big projects. And that's key, nurturing the small units. Next, what you see here is round tables. I know it's a little bit hard to see. 130 round tables. You're only seeing here 20. Every round table here had an entrepreneur that was doing something remarkable in Israel. And he or she were teaching others. Okay, so this is basically about knowledge creation. Someone said earlier something very insightful. All the knowledge necessary to take Greece out of its trouble is available today, right now in Greece. We just you need to find these people, to learn from them, to model them, and then to scale them. Here are 130 case studies in different halls as well. Every table here, someone teaching other people about a great initiative in Israeli society. Okay, next point is addressing market failure. What we see here, we have a region in Israel. I'm sorry, I didn't have in English. There is a region in Israel where there are a lot of micro businesses in the area of tourism. What you have there is a whole that is much smaller than the sum of the parts. Why? Because all these little businesses are competing. No one is, there's no transparency, etc., etc. Oh, I need to finish? I'm sorry?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So what you see here is a philanthropist takes an initiative. And this is an initiative about transparency. She goes to all these micro businesses and she says, you be what you say you are. If you're saying you're a 600 euro a night or dollar a night high-end resort, be that. And if you say that you're a camping site, be that. But I want you to be clean. I want you to offer services. And she totally transformed the ecosystem. Philanthropic intervention, zoomed in on market failure, turning a whole area around. And now she's also involved in training them and so on. Another key element, the government comes in, I'm sorry I didn't have an English photo, builds a faculty of medicine, $400 million investment in a very poor community. This could have easily become a gated community, right? Faculty of medicine, poor people, why should they interact? A lot of work came into being to connect the two together, including, for example, I mean, I don't want to get into the details, but dozens of initiatives that we work with the municipality to connect the poor community to these signature projects. If you're not focused on it, it doesn't happen, this inclusiveness. The last thing I'll say, so here again, these are the questions I'd like to ask about these projects. Obviously, we don't have the time to invest them, but I want to say something about your leadership role, the Niarchos Foundation. The more I've been here, the more impressed I am with the opportunity that is available to you. What you see here in blue is the existing mindset. What you see here in red is the emerging reality. When the emerging reality escapes the existing mindset, this is how we're organized to do things in blue. We have what we call fundamental surprises. These are surprises that don't occur because we don't have information, simply because reality is changing. So we're in denial, and we don't believe it's happening, but at some point you can no longer suppress this gap. And that's when huge upsets occur. Businesses are erased. We all remember there used to be a Kodak. It's no longer here, right? Countries go into civil war. You went into a huge crisis. This is when the moment of fundamental learning begins and leadership. And what I want to say is that it's an extremely difficult period for all the reasons that you see here to be able to contain with this change. But I'd like to say is that you here in the Niarchos Foundation, a lot of people would want you to be providing technical solutions to technical problems. But really what is necessary is an adaptive learning. And the problem with adaptive learning is there are no textbooks, no experts. No one knows the solution to the challenge of Greece today. No one. Everybody needs to figure it out together. So there needs to be someone who's leading this. And I think, based on what I learned, that this foundation has the potential to lead this, because we have to understand no one has authority over this challenge. The government doesn't have authority over this challenge. No one owns this problem. So it's a matter of leadership and societal innovation. And with that, I'll close. There is a lot of conversation we had about technical innovation, physical innovation. The wheel, the cell phone was mentioned, the BlackBerry. But really what is required is societal innovation. New ways of organizing people to solve the problems that are faced by the society. So if in one slide, the challenge, this is it. Help your country and your nation and your society move along the yellow line. And unfortunately, sorry, skip that, no easy answers. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this big picture. Next, Mr. Lamnidis, General Manager of the Association of Greek Tourism Enterprises.
Thank you. I'd like to say that the first time I was approached with this particular project, I was rather amazed by the fact that I saw a group of civil servants willing to cooperate with the private sector. I must tell you, where I come from, this is not very easy. So what I'd like to say is, having the experience that we already have, is I'd like to say a few words as to what is the background and what we represent. SETE, as I've already said, is a confederation of Greek tourism. We represent the whole range of services in the tourism sector, ranging from marinas and rent-a-car to air carriers, hotels, travel agents, you name it. The truth of the fact is that since 2013, we've been elevated to social partner status, meaning that we are one of the main bodies that the government talks and consults on its own aspects. Since 2013, we have created the Institute of SETE, which is the institute that looks after the improvement of the sector. We are pretty novice in that, but we are moving fast, meaning that we try to set standards for quality. We are moving in the direction of improving services, as well as doing some training through third parties. On top of that, the main body of SETE and its entrepreneurs has actually formed Marketing Greece. And Marketing Greece is an anonymous company that is owned mainly by SETE. And this company has come up with a site which is www.discovergreece.com that is actually promoting the experience of Greece and promoting what you can do in this country of ours, as well as actually book it, not just look at it, but book it. All I'm saying is that all this has been done within the last year. So we have come from a background where we were, some few people coming to several tens right now, and aspiring to be a major player in what is seemingly a Greek spring, especially in tourism. Having said that, I must say that it is a rather heavy burden on the shoulders of the Confederation, the fact that everybody is looking at tourism being the only way out for Greece. Certainly this is not easy. Certainly this is a daunting task, but we need to manage. We need to manage our fair share, and we try our best to do that. When I was discussing about the project with the Ministry of Culture at the Stavros Niarchos Foundation, certain things that always come to mind in management came up to my mind concerning the proposal. Why? Why do we need to do that? Who? Who is going to do this? When? Timing is important. How? How is it going to be structured? And of course, how much, which is something that needs to be answered. Now, all these questions have been furthered, if you like, during the project, because some of the answers you've already heard, and I see that we have right now 2 sites, one of them within the Athens area, the other one within Attica, but not in Athens. Of course, there are some question marks that need to be discussed as to why these 2 sites and not something else. The idea is always that if we are to help in the process, what we need is to make sure that this pilot project does not go down. We want to share success and want to help in actually getting success. What are the different advantages that these sites have in order to link them to local communities? And what would be the added value for any tourist agent to actually include these sites to become major spectacles, if you like, for tourists when they come in? We are right now at the point where Greece is actually on the move. As far as tourism is concerned, we are pretty well. For a country of 11 million, we had last year 16.8 million visitors. That's 152% of our population. France, being the #1 country in the world as far as tourists are concerned, had 75 million tourists in a country of 62 million. That is a lower, if you like, proportion, and all I can say is that we can move from one of the top 20 destinations that we are today to the top 10 destinations within the next few years, because we do have, if you like, the good word of the government, and I must say that the Prime Minister has been very keen in helping all the issues that tourism faces within the past year. All I can say is that we do have certain things in the environment that are pro-tourist. And in this particular case, we believe that we need to move forward with this kind of projects, but we need to be rather alerted to the fact that we do not want another, if you like, failure. So all I have already said to my counterparts at the Ministry of Culture was that we do want to help, but we do want to make sure that nothing actually is left behind. During the past day here, and as well as this morning, I have heard several, if you like, statements about tourism, ranging from sending some people from Melbourne to come over to Greece and sort out our problems. But I must say that tourism is a very serious industry that is changing dramatically, that is incorporating many new technologies, and I must say that there are subliminal messages. It is a rather, I would say, complicated process that goes in the mind of people. What makes them decide to come to Greece or to any country indeed when they have several options? All options, actually. This is a very much growing industry. So we are on the rise right now, and we are actually surfing. We do not want to fall down. We make sure that we move forward together with our cultural heritage. Now, culture is a part of the experience that someone wants to share when visiting Greece. Actually, in the website of discovergreece.com, you'll see that we talk about experiences, because we believe that when someone visits a place, he wants the experience. So this is what we are trying to provide him: the experience of gastronomy, the experience of being next to the sea, the experience of actually doing some rafting or canoeing, and the experience of visiting some archaeological sites. So we are getting a lot of information. We are increasing our awareness in the world, and we are pretty serious about getting a very good position in the near future, which, as I said, it is within the top 10 countries in the world. Now, we are open to embrace the ministry's initiatives in order to further the business and enrich our tourist product. We are honored that the ministry wants to actually cooperate with us in order to do something like that, and we will do our utmost in order to reciprocate and provide them with sound experience we do have in order to get it right. We do believe that cultural tourism is something that needs to be subliminal. We are a major product in tourism per se, as Greeks. We are, the country is actually identified with tourism, and as well as archaeological sites. All we want is that the message is subliminal, and be careful not to overblow it, talking about culture all the time. We want them to have experiences, and one of them is culture, and we want the cultural sites to be actually visited and accessed by Greeks as well as tourists. We feel that the local communities must embrace any effort in order for them to feel that they are not cut off from what is happening within their region, and actually feel that they have something to gain. And gain, I do not mean just monetary gain. I'm talking about influence, I'm talking about, if you like, local colors, local products, as well as things that they can actually promote. Meaning, thank you, meaning from cultural heritage they have in the region, apart from the ancient cultural heritage. I'm talking about contemporary cultural heritage, as well as heritage of speech, dancing, literature, or whatever. We feel that we need to address all these areas at the same time, and we are ready to do it. Thank you.
Mr. Michael from the Global Heritage Fund, based in California.
Great, thank you. Am I on? Is it on? Yes. Thank you very much. I'm going to briefly tell you what the Global Heritage Fund is. We were founded 11 years ago in Palo Alto, California, and we deal with archaeological and historical sites. We approach it by something we call preservation by design, that combines scientific conservation, careful planning, together with partnerships and community development. We work on World Heritage sites in areas of great need. So we see community development as essential, not because it is our primary goal. Our primary goal is to save heritage. But the fact of the matter is you can dump millions and billions of dollars into heritage, and if the local people are not benefiting from it, are not becoming the stewards of it, that money is entirely wasted and will be gone in a generation. And we have found that in projects from Peru to China to Cambodia to Turkey to Guatemala and so forth. Our expertise is heritage, but we can't save heritage without community-driven development. And that's more than just training, it's more than just tourism, but those elements are very important. It's also the most sustainable type of development. If I build a factory or a shop, that factory or shop can pick up and move to another place. The Agora is not going to pick up and move to another place. It's always going to be of that community. So the question is, how do you create that sense of ownership in the community? because that's the most important element. Unfortunately, heritage actually gives us the process to do that. One of the most important tools we have is the Borough Charter from 1999. And the Borough Charter says that heritage isn't actually a set of rules for how you conserve things or what you can and can't do to an archaeological or historical site. It's a process whereby you engage the community, the stakeholders, in defining what is important about their past and how is the best way to bring that into the future. It works in every place because it's specific to the place, because it engages the local stakeholders. It doesn't mean the answer will be the same in two countries or even within two regions of one country. So we've been doing this for about 11 years. We've done some projects. There are some brochures out front that show you some of the projects we've done around the world. I think our experience can provide a couple insights that I'd like to share with you about this project. We've worked on community-based tourism projects that are specifically relevant to the discussion in the paper today. Community-based tourism sort of resonates with some of the things we heard yesterday about, employee ownership, about social enterprise and things like that. Because one of the big challenges to tourism is how do you capture the revenue? How do you keep it within the community or within the country even? I was at a tour of Angkor Wat, and the tour guide was telling me that, all the money you spend here, it's all going to Vietnam. This is 2 months ago. So there's some interesting issues. I'd like to basically respond to the specific program we're looking at from the ministry, and then secondly, add some questions and considerations as we go forward. So overall, I think the goal of this program, this pilot project, is excellent. And I forgot, like everyone else, to thank Stavros Niarchos Foundation for making this possible, but thank you for that and for this pilot program. It creates a potential for more tourism to more sites within Greece. There is a critical mass. This idea of a cluster or bringing things together, not just sites, but also cultural heritage is important. I like the phrase integrated cultural experience. It's also important because it builds on areas where a tourist infrastructure is already in place. Therefore, you can add more days and more income without adding more facilities that require capital investment, which is important. Often what we're doing is working in remote sites where you actually have to create an infrastructural investment to get the people there. I also think that the connection at Brauron to nature and the natural environment is important. We have seen incredible resilience and sustainability with our projects in places like Guatemala and Colombia, where you have a heritage site that's within a protected natural reserve, because it just enhances the interest of that to a wider group of people. The pilot program is also good because I like the way it's designed. It's designed like the projects we design. You have a management plan at the beginning, you have a conservation program, you have an important, and I think this is one of the areas you really have to get right, marketing plan. This is something we always do at the front end. The second phase talks about stakeholder needs. The actual verbiage I got didn't really follow what I see as the correct stakeholder engagement you find in Borough Charter, where you really don't just inform the community. This is something that comes from archaeological practice, and at the risk of criticizing archaeologists, there is a tendency to say, okay, here's what we're going to do to you. That's not how you do it. It's more, here's the asset, what do you think of it? What are your goals? What are your needs? And then to say, okay, can we look at this as an asset? How can that help fulfill your goals and needs? Because we know the answer won't be the same in every place. And then the third phase, the physical work, is also, I think, excellent, although the specifics of that will need to come out of a correct planning process. I think Greece has a unique opportunity in the tourism sector. It's a leader in archaeology and monuments. It can be a thought leader in the marketing, management, and interpretation of heritage. So what are some of the questions and considerations? One is, how do you create the community ownership? I've outlined that a bit. Two is, how do you pay for it long term? Because a lot of our traditional models are based on government again. Oh, we'll make it a museum. I'll tell you something, most museums, in my experience, I'm also on the board of the National Trust in this country, the average house museum in the United States takes in $10 per visitor and spends $50 on that same visitor. And that has been the economic model since 1903. It's never been different. And so you really have to think of how are you going to pay for it long term, and how do you capture that revenue? Think about the types of tourism too. This is a thing to consider. You have mass tourism. We work in China, and we heard from Richard Friedman yesterday about the Chinese tourists. I totally agree with him. Bring in the Chinese tourists. They spend $390. They do a lot of shopping. The shopping helps you capture the revenue you're not getting in admissions. But when we work in China, we have the other 95% of Chinese tourists, the domestic market. And they are high impact, low value. They do a lot of wear and tear on the sites and bring up capacity issues. Thank you. So high-end tourism is worth focusing on, as the minister said yesterday in the final speech. I think it's important to cater to this market, to cater to the niche markets, agritourism, mountain, cultural, archaeological. And the best tourists are the ones that stay longer and spend more. Second area of consideration or question, interpretation and technology. Interpretation is really important. The stories have to evolve. You have the opportunity to create the narrative. Creating the narrative is a job in itself, and it's something that needs to be refined. But I'd like to talk about delivery, and as someone from Silicon Valley, this is going to be heretical, but you know, one of the things that has happened in our technology adoption is that we have traded historically quality for control. So the fact that I can do it all by myself and tour New York with my mobile apps and not have to talk to anybody, it's low quality. If I listen to my MP3s, it's low quality compared to vinyl. That means you need to focus on a high-end market, because the face-to-face, a tour guide can actually, a face-to-face tour guide is a wonderful interaction. You get much more value. You can ask questions. You can go back and forth, and it happens with an instantaneous and a personal connection that you can't get from the best app in the world. At the same time, it's important to have the virtual tourism, especially when you're talking about reconstructing monuments that are falling apart and so forth. I think I'm going to go right to what I think are the final challenges, since I have about 1 minute and 17 seconds left. Thank you. And one is the question I asked the minister yesterday, what is the infrastructure? Where the first 2 pilot projects are good because I think the infrastructure is there. But when you start wanting to open up more remote sites, and of course you do, because you want to get these high-end tourists to stay longer, do you have the capacity to get the people there, keep them there, service them in the quality that they are expecting? Secondly, education. Language is key. Language is very important. There's been a lot of discussion of education. I have some opinions. I do think there's a lot of value to the traditional, what we call liberal arts education, the School of Athens, if you will, because it gives people critical thinking, problem solving, and the flexibility. We live in a world that, thanks to technology, education is not one phase of life. People and jobs and technology means we're going to be retraining people every 10 years from now on, not just once in their lives. So what is the long-term budget? Don't create another government subsidy. So I think in final 12 seconds I will say, design a good tourism plan and follow it. Look at capacity, look at control, and look at revenue capture. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Rai from the American School of Classical Studies in Athens.
I'm going to take the podium because I feel like I'll fall off if I get too excited there. Yes, I'd like to thank everyone for their participation in this conference. It's been incredibly stimulating. I can't believe how many notes I've taken, and I want to thank the president of the foundation, and the ministers and others who've given their valuable time, and also to the organization of this conference. I've never been to a conference that had such a diverse set of people who represent not only so many different sectors, but also so many different competencies. I only wish there'd been some anthropologists here, because as much as I love listening to economists, it's the anthropologists who live among the community and give us analysis of it. But I've learned so much, so I'm just very grateful for the opportunity. The American School of Classical Studies, of which I'm the director, is an institution that was founded in 1881. It's one of 17 different foreign archaeological research institutes all of which serve as clearinghouses for primarily archaeological research throughout Greece for scholars from their country. And it's a unique situation. I don't think there's another country in the world that has welcomed, over such a long time, so many foreign researchers on its soil. Just to give you some perspective on this, the Archaeological Society of Athens was founded in 1837. That's the premier non-governmental archaeological group in Athens. It conducts excavations. And in 1846, the École Française d'Athènes was organized, and it is therefore the oldest of the foreign institutes, followed by the German Archaeological Institute in 1874, the Americans in 1881, as I mentioned, and the British School in 1886. These are just the sort of big four old institutions, but it shows how deeply invested they are in the study, the recovery, and the understanding and interpretation of the cultural heritage of Greece, which today is not merely 5th century Athens. It extends from deep prehistory, deep into paleontology, right up to the present. And the American School is a good example of that because it is the steward of the collection of Johannes Gennadius, which was given to the American School in 1922 and is housed in a library that we built in 1926, and which today is becoming one of the major repositories for archival holdings throughout Greece. So we have the archives of Odysseus Elitis, Yorgos Seferis, Elias Venetsis, Konstantinos Vovolinis, and on and on. And that means that researchers coming to the American School don't just study classical antiquity, they study Byzantine, they study Ottoman, they study early travelers, and today they're studying 20th century Greek culture in important ways. And I mention this because it's simply a way of signaling that there's, of the 17 archaeological research institutes in Greece, there is then a constant presence of an international community that's hosted by the Ministry of Culture, by the universities, that is part and parcel of the creation of knowledge out of the past. Now, archaeology is unique because it's an extremely destructive practice. We're the only social science that actually kill off our interviewers as we interview them because we dig them away, which actually raises a fundamental theoretical and philosophical question. What is it that we choose to preserve? And what we choose to preserve is not something that's merely an object of research. More and more, it's something that we have to protect, preserve, and present. And certainly in my own career, as I came through the curriculum of the university and through graduate school, and I think it's fair to say that the curriculum that I followed was not unlike that of Dr. Mendoni and Dr. Valakou and others. It was very academic in its orientation and in a sense very traditional in its orientation. Having risen to the position as director of the American School of Classical Studies, I find myself having to be a manager, an administrator. And that means that I have to recognize there are a lot of things that I wasn't trained in and I don't necessarily understand. It's a very Socratic process if I'm going to do a good job of what I'm doing. And as I look back over the history of the American School and the responsibilities of the American School in Greece, I realize that I need to consult with a lot of people and find out what are the best practices in such things as heritage conservation, which is a huge responsibility for all of us to undertake. It isn't that we weren't involved in conservation and presentation. The American School built the museum at ancient Corinth in 1929. It reconstructed the Stoa of Attalus in the 1950s. So in a sense, we've been centrally involved in this, but our understanding that these shouldn't simply be products of our research mentality, but rather, as Vince was just pointing out, that they in fact need to be part and parcel of a fabric that identifies and interviews and listens to the different stakeholders, if we can use that term, is something that's actually new on the horizon. And in the practices of heritage conservation, particularly as exercised by the Gidi Conservation Institute, which was founded in 1985, and which is a leader in the definition and organization of site and heritage management on a worldwide basis. Given the resources that it has, it's really been definitive in helping us to understand and define this field. When I was a graduate student, you simply got a doctorate. You read Greek, Latin, you learned some ancient monuments and ancient architecture and ancient art, and maybe if you were a little revolutionary, you wandered into anthropology and started to think about what it all meant. But today, in the university, students are clamoring to participate in things called museum studies. Well, that wasn't a part of my curriculum. They're interested in going into heritage conservation, site management. It wasn't even on our lips when I was a student in the 1960s and 70s. And yet, this is in fact a fundamental responsibility of the discipline today, because we can't simply dig it up, research it, hold it to ourselves as some kind of private knowledge. We get funding from the National Endowment for the Humanities, the National Geographic Society, and that means that we have a fundamental responsibility to return our knowledge to the community, to the taxpayers who help fund us. And that kind of public relationship is fundamentally important. And in the context of this conference, it seems to me that that's where the scholarly archaeologist wants to engage with the Ministry of Tourism, with the Ministry of Culture, with the Ministry of Agricultural Development, and say, how can all these different entities come together and really try to produce something that will have an economic impact on the crisis that Greece finds itself in? So it isn't simply a matter of a practice that we can engage in on a worldwide basis, but we have a fundamental problem we've been talking about over the past 2 days. And of course, the focus of this conference is youth unemployment and how we can deal with some of these issues. And I've been thinking about that in my own experience working in Greece, because it seems to me that it's very important that we have a values-based approach to heritage management, which means, once again, figuring out how we can identify the different stakeholders that we're working with. Yes, I have a stopwatch here. And then bringing them all to the table. And we had a great slide here earlier that showed all these people sitting around different tables, teaching each other and learning from each other. And I think it's important that we bring them to the table and find ways to get them to work together. And the fundamental problem in trying to do that is that it tends to be the case that different institutional entities of whatever nature, it could be a department, it could be a ministry, it could be an economic entity, tend to act as silos, and they talk to the people who do what they do because they're comfortable and they understand each other's language. And we need to find ways to break down the walls of those silos and get people to work together for common purposes. Otherwise, we're simply going to repeat on that blue line that was shown to us the mistakes that we've made in the past, and we really need a new paradigm. And one of the things that we need to do then is to create subgroups, sort of interagency or inter-silo units that aren't run by the leaders of each silo, but rather by subalterns who are given specific responsibilities down the line to carry out and work at specific problems among different groups. And I'm speaking generally here because when I think about the issues that have been presented in the examples that we have here of the Kyriakidis on the one hand and the sanctuary at Brouwen on the other, I think about all the other adjacencies. The Kyriakidis was excavated first by the Archaeological Society, then by the German Archaeological Institute, and as we go from the Pompeian along the Pan-Athenaic Way, we suddenly come into the Agora of Athens, which has been excavated by the American School of Classical Studies. So there are, in fact, a lot of different stakeholders here who have different kinds of knowledge and experiences, not to mention the community that lives in the Plaka and that thrives there and has its own perspective on that area, and the many, many different tourists who move through these areas. And trying to figure out how to bring them all into a conversation has to be part and parcel of the solution to this particular problem. One of the things that I want to end on here, which has to do directly with the question of youth unemployment, is how can we, in fact, bring youth and others into the dialogue, into the discussion. And one of the things that I keep thinking about is that if we have overeducated individuals, are there ways that we can give them meaningful internships, postdoctoral research things within projects such as these that are being carried out on the one hand, and the other, in the sense of sustainability, have them become some of the owners of these heritage places that we'd like to create for touristic purposes. And one of the ways that they could become owners is that they could become kind of information rangers. So not tour guides, but people who develop and run programming within archaeological sites, archaeological parks, that they provide to the tourists and other individuals who come to make use of these sites. We do this in the US through the National Park Service and the park rangers. But I'm not talking about supplanting the guards, nor am I talking about undermining tour guides. What I'm talking about is programming that will bring people with bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, and doctoral degrees into these sites to engage with tourists, as we were just hearing about, in a very direct way around themes and issues, whether they're nature or history or the actual material culture of the archaeological artifact, in programs that lead to a richer experience in multiple languages, because many of these people can speak Greek, French, German, English, Chinese, Russian, and so forth. So I just wanted to end on that because in the session this afternoon, we haven't talked so much about employment opportunities, but I think there are very many of them, particularly in these areas that have to do with reaching out to youth. So I thank you very much for your attention and the opportunity to speak here this afternoon.
Thank you very much. So in the interest of time, we'd like to take some questions. And behind.
Thank you very much. This is Julia Deans from the Canadian Youth Business Foundation, and I would just like to pick up on a point of the last speaker, which was about engaging youth in these conversations. And it struck me over and over again today that these are all wonderful opportunities and that much more can be made of them if we leverage the youth that you have available to you, particularly those working in entrepreneurship. I was in Moscow 2 weeks ago for a gathering of the Global Entrepreneurship Congress, which is 153 countries that host Global Entrepreneurship Week. The Greek delegation won for having put on the very best Global Entrepreneurship Week of 153 countries around the world. Yes. They were incredible. And when you talk to a young entrepreneur and you give them a problem, they never look at you puzzled or depressed. They say, let me at it. So whether it's the work you're doing in tourism, if it's the Institute, and you have the list of people who are going to be contributing, have people other than the institutions and the establishment and bring on some of these people, because they truly will just revolutionize your thinking, and their access to the networks they have will blow you away. You don't have to become a social network person. They've got them all. So I've heard so many amazing ideas, but I really hope you'll capitalize on what I've already seen as the incredible strength of the entrepreneurs you have in Greece.
So there's not much to answer in this. It's a great statement. But one can say that there are obviously a lot of openings in all this. There is commercial space, there is touring possibilities, there are all sorts of applications, new technology applications that obviously we would want. I mean, the state cannot really undertake these things. It's entrepreneurs that are going to do this. And so what we need to do is to provide the correct platform so that the right sort of science is there for people to take advantage of. And that's what we are hoping to do.
I'm afraid we're not going to have more time, but I would just like to ask if Dr. Mendoni or you would like to make some comments.
Yes, I'd just like to make a few comments, especially on the speeches that were made just before me, and it's actually really great to have all these people here to give us feedback. There are one or two things that a lot of you are wondering about. Why did we choose these specific sites? We had 1 month and a half to come up with the sites. And so we created a focus group that took into consideration some documents on national strategy, some documents on how Greece is going to be in the next 10 years' time, and we identified a version of what Greece is at the moment, what Greece is going to be in the next 20 years. We also saw what do visitors to Greece want and what do visitors to Greece receive. And so the demand that is not met plus the strategy helped us identify specific narratives that would be winners as regards antiquity. So these narratives then we marked and we identified the sites that would be central to as many narratives as possible. And then using the ministry criteria that we needed to have sites that were almost ready and easy to visit, and sites that are not going to need a lot of work, but sites that are important. So we basically needs, and we also needed to have sites that were obviously in the Athens area, that could create the city break sort of destination. We basically took all this into consideration and we arrived at these two sites. So this is one comment, and then we just hope that the other thing that I need to say is that when we're talking about when we're talking about this project, it's a pilot project. So we're really trying to identify weaknesses and strengths in a collaboration such as this. And we're really trying to identify possible education outcomes, creating the right human resources that would be best adapted for something like that in the future. So these are the two comments I'd like to make. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your patience. Just a note that in the booklet that you've received, you have a card that includes information, a short video on the Cultural Center in Athens, which is, it's not part of the initiative on recharging youth, but it's a major, the Foundation's major initiative on arts and culture and regeneration as well in Greece, and expected to be delivered by the end of 2015. So,
This one.
yes, it's this one. Thank you very much.